Yosemite National Park is a cathedral of stone and shadow, where the sheer scale of the granite monoliths can make a person feel like a passing thought. It is a masterpiece of the natural world, draped in emerald pines and waterfalls that draw the millions into its embrace. Yet, beneath the postcard-perfect beauty lies a vast and indifferent wilderness that has swallowed more souls than the official records admit. For those who know the park's ancient secrets, the towering cliffs are silent sentinels guarding a terrain where the laws of physics occasionally buckle. It is a land of deceptive peace, where a sunny afternoon can turn into a nightmare in the blink of an eye. David knew this landscape well. As a former search and rescue officer, he had spent a decade pulling the lost from the Sierras. He was a man of discipline, and believing every mystery had a logical explanation. After a grueling divorce, he looked to these mountains for a different kind of rescue. He wanted to reconnect and emotionally bond with his 8-year-old son, Sam, away from the city's tension. This camping trip was a bridge back to the ever-growing boy he feared he was losing. Sam, with his wide eyes and curiosity, was the only thing that kept David's internal compass pointing north during his darkest times. The sun was beginning its descent, casting vibrant amber shadows across the trail. They were walking a simple stretch of dirt that David had hiked many times. Sam was a few paces ahead, humming a tune and poking soft moss with a stick. David paused, feeling the slack in his hiking boot. He knelt to tighten the laces, his eyes fixed on the knot for 5 seconds. While in that brief window, the forest went heavy and unnaturally still. The wind stopped and the birdsong vanished. When David stood up and called Sam's name, there was only a heavy silence where his son's voice should have been. At first, he thought Sam was playing a game, but as his seconds turned into minutes, the professional in David began to scream. He moved down the trail with clinical precision, searching for terrifying signs of a struggle. There were no broken branches, no scuff marks, and most chillingly, no footprints. It was as if Sam had simply been lifted off the earth. The logic that had governed David's life began to fray. He shouted until his voice was raw, his cries echoing off the granite. But the only response was the frighteningly mocking silence of the darkening woods that seemed to absorb every sound. A night fell over Yosemite like a suffocating shroud. David spent those hours pacing the perimeter of their campsite, his flashlight beam cutting holes in the oppressive blackness. The guilt was a physical weight, a crushing pressure in his chest. He was a man trained to find the missing, yet he had lost his own son on a simple flat trail. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The mountains seemed to loom closer, the wind sounding like a quiet and rhythmic breathing. He felt watched, not by a predator he understood, but by an ancient force waiting patiently in the dark trees. When dawn touched the valley, the Rangers and K-9 units arrived. David watched with fearful eyes as the handlers led bloodhounds toward the last place he had seen Sam. These were elite dogs, capable of tracking a scent for miles through the heavy brush. They picked up the trail, pulling toward Granite Creek, but as they reached the water's edge, they stopped dead, their fur bristling. They didn't bark. They whimpered in primal terror. No matter how much the handlers commanded, the animals completely refused to cross the water, staring at the empty woods on the other side as if sensing something unnatural and predatory lurking in the heavy silence. The searchers pushed forward, leaving the terrified dogs behind. A frantic call over the radio broke the silence of the valley. David surged up a scree slope until he reached a group of rangers staring at a vertical granite wall. They looked at each other with uncharacteristic uncertainty. There, snagged on a sharp rock spur 30 feet above the forest floor, it was Sam's red windbreaker. It hung limp against the gray stone, a shocking splash of color in the wilderness. David's heart hammered. There were no handholds for a child to use. He felt a sickening lurch of vertigo just looking at the height. The jacket wasn't torn or shredded from a fall. It was draped carefully, almost ceremoniously, over the stone. At the temporary command center, the atmosphere soured. David watched as the lead ranger began marking the map with a cold, bureaucratic finality. They were shifting the narrative, suggesting that Sam was a runaway because of the divorce. David felt a cold fury rising. He knew the protocol for a simple disappearance, and this was not it. The air in the room felt heavy with things left unsaid. He saw the patterns of a cover-up forming. The official reports were being sanitized. Mentions of the impossible jacket and the paralyzed hounds were omitted. It was as if the Park Service feared the truth more than the loss of a child. The wilderness he once protected now felt like a stranger, a partner in a conspiracy that spanned generations. David broke away from the official search grid. Near the ruins of an old homestead, he encountered a man who held the haunted look of someone who had seen behind the curtain of the world. The old man's eyes were clouded with secrets. He seemed to know more than he was telling. He didn't offer false hope. He spoke of thin places in the granite where the veil grew porous. The park wasn't just trees and stones, but a predatory entity that occasionally took what it desired. According to him, the mountain had been claiming children long before the trails were blazed. "No, it doesn't hunt for food," the hermit whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "It hunts for the light they carry." As the sun dipped, the sky fractured. A localized storm erupted with a violence that defied logic. While the rest of the valley remained under a clear sky, black clouds and freezing rain slammed down directly over the search area. The wind howled through the pines with a pulsing sound that mimicked a human voice. Within minutes, temperatures plummeted, and the helicopters were forced to ground, their thermal sensors blinded by an unnatural curtain of ice. David felt the malevolence. It wasn't a weather event. It was a physical barrier meant to keep the world away from whatever was happening in the deep shadows of the high country. Seeking shelter, David squeezed through a narrow fissure into a hidden cavern that smelled of wet earth and ancient iron. As he swept his light across the floor, his breath hitched. The cave was a repository of the lost. He saw a rusted tin whistle, a muddy teddy bear, and dozens of mismatched shoes. This was a silent museum of every child who had vanished into the Yosemite shadows. The realization hit him. The park was not a sanctuary. It was a vast, sprawling hunting ground where the disappeared were kept as trophies in the dark. Pushing deeper into the cave, David found a high ledge. Resting there was Sam's black flashlight. David reached out with trembling fingers. The plastic was warm to the touch. He clicked the switch, and the beam cut through the dark, strong and steady. Beside the flashlight, pressed into the ancient dust of the cave floor, was a single, fresh footprint. It was massive, with elongated, claw-like toes. It was the mark of something that did not belong to the animal kingdom, the footprint of the thing that had his son. The cold was no longer just a physical sensation. It was an invasive, sentient presence that seemed to gnaw at David's soul as he emerged from the hidden cave. High above, the forbidden zone loomed, a jagged crown of granite that the park rangers avoided even in the peak of summer. Ignoring the distorted crackle of the radio he had taken from the command center, David began his ascent into the heart of the storm. The blizzard was a screaming wall of white, a localized fury that seemed designed to isolate him from the world. Yet, through the roar of the wind, he heard it. A small, familiar voice drifted through the freezing mist. It called his name, but the cadence was chillingly off. "David, I am here. David, I am here. David, I am here." The words were perfect, yet they lacked the breathy irregularity of a child's speech. They sounded like a digital recording played on a loop, a mechanical mimicry produced by something that understood the sound of grief but not the spirit behind it. It was a siren song designed to lure him into the void. He pushed through drifts of snow that shouldn't have been there, his lungs burning with every agonizing gasp of thin mountain air. The higher he climbed, the more the physical world seemed to warp. The ancient pines were twisted into agonized shapes, and the rocks beneath his boots seemed to pulse with a low-frequency hum that vibrated in his teeth. At the absolute summit of the peak, at a place an 8-year-old child could never reach alone, David finally found him. Sam was sitting on a flat slab of granite that had been swept eerily clean of snow by an invisible force. He was dressed only in his t-shirt, yet he wasn't shivering. His eyes were wide and vacant, fixed on a point in the sky where the clouds swirled in a perfect mathematical circle. David gathered the boy into his arms, expecting the icy chill of death, but Sam was unnervingly warm. His skin radiated a strange, humming heat that felt like an electric current coursing just beneath the surface. The descent was a blurred nightmare of exhaustion. David felt the presence of the ancient force closing in behind them, a shadow larger than the mountains, watching from the periphery of his vision. He didn't look back, not even when the wind began to whisper his own secrets. He ran until his knees buckled, finally collapsing into the arms of a startled search party miles away from the forbidden zone. The medical teams were baffled. Sam had no signs of frostbite or dehydration despite days in the sub-zero wilderness, yet the boy who returned was not the son David had lost. He remained in a deep, catatonic trance, his gaze forever fixed on a world the rest of humanity was never meant to see. He never spoke another word, his voice stolen by whatever had claimed him. In the hollow years that followed, David's life became a lonely crusade. He traded his rescue gear for a library of maps and testimonies, becoming a guardian for those whose loved ones had been swallowed by the silence. The Park Service officially closed the case, citing Sam's survival as a miraculous anomaly, but David refused to let the silence win. He spent his nights in a dim office papered with missing person reports, connecting the impossible dots that the authorities tried to erase. He became the person families called when the official search ended, the man who knew that some disappearances weren't accidents, but a systematic harvest. Thousands of people vanish in the national parks every year. While most are found, a terrifying percentage disappear without a single trace. No scent, no clothing, and no logical explanation. The beauty of these places is a grand deception, a tapestry draped over an ancient void. David looked at his son, still sitting by the window, staring at the distant peaks with a hollow longing, and he understood the cost of the truth. As the sun sets, the shadows stretch out like long, hungry fingers. On a map pinned to David's wall, dozens of red X marks represent the spots where the ground is said to swallow the light, the areas where the ancient things still wait for the next person to look away for just 5 seconds.